Pomjam Namjala Sunova, the Omin Chuji, Inge Podang, the Sun Sanji Kunjingo, Ransum Chobu, Musum Don Zeba, Zavilla Me Shabla Sorova, the Tiang, Dovanam Kita Danyam Besim Jen Tamje, Dungal Junjen Yedan Talde, Topjalana Me Bayanda Barzo, Sanje, Govan Rimbochela, Govarajivo, Ti Chido, Tambichu Deni. Senchen, Sulishindo, Nyam Sulamara Jivo, Nyambe Samba Chanju Chodo, Tokepa Rimboch, Saltabe Bone Simbarisho, Kang Simbara Chavi, Chugi Rimbani, Jumi Pam Rimboche, Zebe, Kebi Tsula Jubi, Go Shechavi, Tencho Tini Imbare, De La Yang, Dene, Luigi, Da Ushabi Tun, Rao de la. Mune kebi ne chu ane chuki domshi soso yang dabe rikpa shi dindes yoba le tangbo kebi ne chu kabla yins kebi ne chu dinane ne tangbo pungbo la kebas pungbo de la yang ena tani nga tamba yobe suki pungbo chori pungbo dushe ki pungbo duje ki pungbo nambar shebi pungbo sene nga yobe nani shiba duje ki pungbo sen Number Duce Bena Duce gets yes, you demon then talk shin Duce Bena, Duces, Tiki Pumbo de las, and then Pumbo de la, and Sim so Sim down Sundin Gurvis Simjung, Nachum Nashix in Jingdam, and Sim down Sundin my bed, Sundin member, Sin Tendency, Ni, you been a tambota. Semdang Sungden di Kabla, de la Yang Simjung de la Napchung Yenga, Napchung Yenga Namne, the Kundo Na de Shu Simbare, Yungenga de Shu Simbare, Kesim Chukji de Shu Simbare, the name Chik de Zanyun Tok de Zanyun Tok de Shu Simbare, the Direng de Ninyun Nishu de Kabla Yins.
At the beginning of class, please give rise to bodhicitta, thinking, may all sentient beings who are as numerous as the sky is vast and have all been my mother sentient beings attain perfect, the state that is free of all suffering and the causes for suffering. So in order to establish all sentient beings at the level of perfect and complete awakening, the ultimate result, may I study and reflect and put the teachings correctly into practice. With that kind of motivation, please listen to the teachings. The text that we're studying in this class is the treatise entitled The Gate for Entering the Way of a Pandita, in short, The Gateway to Knowledge, by Mibam Rinpoche. And when we look at the text from beginning to end, then it includes the 10 topics of expertise, the 4 seals of Dharma, and the 4-fold correct discrimination. We're currently discussing the 10 topics of expertise, and from within those, the first one, the aggregates. There are 5 aggregates: form, sensation, perception, formation, and consciousness, and we're currently discussing formations. Formations are defined as the act of thoroughly creating, or the fact that many things are formed together based on different kinds of causes and conditions. And so here then, in the aggregate of formation, we find 2 categories of formations. One are the formations that are concurrent with the main mind, therefore they're called the concurrent formations, and there we speak about the 51 mental states in this context. And then there are also the non-concurrent formations. That's the second part that we will cover. Currently, we're discussing the concurrent formations. And we can say that there are 51 or 55 concurrent 51 or 55 mental states that are discussed in this context. And we have already completed the discussion of the 5 ever-present mental states. the 5 object determining mental states, the 11 virtuous mental states, and the 6 root disturbing emotions. And today we will continue with the discussion talking about the 20 subsidiary disturbing emotions.
네, 가상대 따와 다시 zanyun tukina tawa yora tawa de la ena yang tawa ena nga thamba ani shawre tadi tawa de kala jiwa lentos tadi jiwa de la jiwa kande do na tawa chosen yin me kandes na ha ko to bam kandes na ha ko to res tawa chosen tawa la chosen jiwa res na kandes na ha ko res sindanten tiwado tadila tawa chosen sen ta pejadegi nangla kande sungresna tawa chosen ne gongge tawa ngeba sumdang tawi ne yelengi phumbola cho dang dambar tawa de sen tadene tawa ngeba ngombar himbas dinesen resungane ta nyawar lengbe phumbo de ta be ji kansna dembar yoba dembar tubi yoba dene zangma imba takpa imba ane be chapo a deneg이랑 신제 dembar tuba yoba yo tututar도 지중게 여러와 denzo yang ane phumbola tawa phumbola ta tawra chop zimbares ta dedam ane tawa ngemba sum la se tawa ngemba sum sin jikta tarta lokta se yakang tawa ngemba sum torwa o denzo la chop zimbas sedikala 인규 denzo chok tu jirwa mares jikta sena chok tu jirwa mares dana shen lokta tarta chok tu jirwa mares chok tu jirwa sena ngobe nitsul da tunba denzo la chok tu jirwa ngobe nitsul da matuna chok tu jirwa mares ta tanda jikta dang tarta lokta sumbo de la ngobe nitsul da tunba res samgyo ta jikta nga yer zimba se jikta singinde tanda nyawar lembi phungbo de la tene nga o nyamba tang ani tager zimba sne ngai lakpa ngai kangba ngai khangba ngai chogo thongma sne la ta dinzo chokdo jurwa mare se mune chena di lega dinzo di samlo chokdo jurwa mare yina yang tene ngarang zo tawa choksun chidi kabla ta di mune re nga sing di mune yore ngai lakpa sing mune re ngai kangba mune yore temper tupa yore ngai nyen nyen chok thoma de yore senida pe mune re ro samde re tawa choksun re ka tenzo yako re sena ta chik mune du yoyo tutu ta de ta de indu ne inyu ngobe ne chula ane nga tang ngai trobo sin tendes du manyung na yang loburgi jeme wangi ni nga ye ngai trobo tomo ye sen lamne choktu jingido stela tawa chosen sta tene tarda sen tan jigbare konjonye de tan jigba ta kam phungbonga la takpa da chepara jimbas 제 풍봉하고 대다 나 쓰긴제 다 열에 덴바르두 다데 뭐마네 열에 남시시 바둘라 열에 거의 따빠 가상 로망봉문에 깨겨 대당 단당아 미딩아 다랑레스 마음방아 시시 바둘라 여현댕아 다랑레스 소소디랑 레스 미디랑 레스네 텐데당 테네 따빠라다 따 인규 모빈네 술라 따디로 말레스 당저 깨지 단다 딱 가능스나 리베타션 제용되가라 깨지 유진 초네 깨지 사파케네 깨지 유진 초네 깨지 다 줄대겨라 당공기 수보당 대린 수보 줄대겨래 근데 이제 줄대겨래 때 인규 초도 짐바데 당 인규 모빈네 술데 디레데 딜라 디네 딜라타 마로니 타 당공대 나이 드링대 나이 상녀대 나이 남네타 친줄로라데 촉도 다 다랑레 선에 촉도 좀 말하지 제발 좀 봐서나다니 되니 시송나니 여기 말에 엄마께와 간대진이 내면 하모고스 다 시송나니 나승지 여기 말에 되지 샘되는 남칼라 팀 쪽에 그래 수분이 사추 메가롱지게 남나 메와차 소여샤기래 된데스네 된데스 삼바데 아니 메바르 심바라오데 네 ngobine chula tene mebanido mejowa kewa chima da chima ngama da ngama thuni lewi imba de la ateta du ma de lobar tane tene di ta dum ha shi ne tene nga chi me samba munere samne chok du zimba chok zim ta na shin lo ta chi pa chi jang de le jun de tang den ji demba shi ne lu la so ba ngobine chula tende sin yo na yang 소소게 대 매와 딱도 통교래 따디 매와 따디 오네래 또 삼대래 스디인데 갈라 촉도 짐바스 내주다 매와래 스네 문에 요래 또 삼바스 촉도 짐바스 디인데 갈라 따와 촉신 야 딘데스네 하고 두게레스 따와 촉신 따와 촉신 임바데 어딘데스 하고 두게레스 따와 촉신 민바데 간데스 하고 따와 촉신 민바스 데갈라 다 모비네술 그런 간데 그저 시에 막 다가는 신도 시샤 로스한테 따와 초긴 심바 마르와 따와 초긴데 빵투기로와 근데 단다 따와 초긴 유디가라 레준데 유지 마레 생같이 유지 마레 섬네 다 로컬 따와 초긴 내려와 다 슝룩라 저섬 전에 레준데 유여바 생같이 유바된 야고 하고 전에 되네 이제스네 람람 브로통나 아니 따와 초긴 민바데스 나데레 안디네 이제 원아디 도르심 꿈데도 지나와 변나마도 도르심비 꿈데도 딘데스네 냠네도 지나 오늘 대야 따와 초선 이난 따디 가르서 도르심바데 야고레 따디 검고레 따디 띠바 따기레 따디 야고레 로 삼네 따지 검기로 와티 따디 따와 초선 이난 스네 삼이자라 할람마도로와 디 따와 초선 이난 스네 지고스
데 조가조 조진 소점당 조가조 다 소점당 투숙 조진 라 샤기요사레 조sem디
알레옹나스 따디 도르셈데 출림 뚫슈디 이남센 따디 출림 뚫슈 이남센 가디 페차디그나 가리손다 날와 제부 메바르 제베 레젠노 센소 출림 뚫슈기 제라 소림 도시스로 ngalwa jibu mebar cheba ta torsim komba de ngalwa tan jibu mebar cheba mare torsim komba de jibu yobar cheba re tanda de ya gang chulim tulcho de jibu mebar cheba re ya gang gi chulim tulchi den dula shugni ngalwa jangba supula kale jangba khae matopi menga temba ane supu chirang ma rowa ane se 추 택바레레레 니마레레라 아니 세깡레레레레 사회 된데기 추림 뚫축 된데 여러와 람카실라 까토길레 된조 ngalwa 장바레 아니 데우데 슈춤을 랩토게요 말에다 데우 랩토게요 말다 도르셈데 안티도게 데우메바 마레스 도르셈데 데우요
이네 ngats 소소 키워디 칸데스 하코토게레 ngats 도르셈 곰네 데보도이 람상 하마고신도 데네 toujours da chemegir geht so schön nachhin da dige eva kann es hakotu gere so kevo ge lam tebote ma tongde
ore lamsang da dorsem kumde do chi songna da diba daresne lamsang mixe 통해 지다 요 말에 대 이나지 diba daresne mixe lamsang jigla da lamsang jigla 소소 kevo ge 수 도보 단다대로 수업도 통하는 선생님 디바 다와레스는 믹스에서 통해서다 요 말에 이나 즉 당업의 내출당 다든조 깨차들도 양 뒤수만 보고 그러기로 와. 다 깨차 시에나다 양 거의 북라 존에 갈래갈래 디바 간데스 다게 디 소림도 시 초진 마인 바데 간데스도 양 다디 도선 곰데 갑라 양 뒤뒤로 좀 남나 안 뒤뒤 살보 연계로 와. 다양 딜 깨차 시에다 망보여래 코출림도 슈라 마토당 간데레스네 나 다간스나 깨차 도르드니 랍나 단지 디나라 추림 돌슈 ngalwa 데부 메바 라야데 ngo비네 술당 파툼바기 ngalwa 까투 지 임발라 떼네 다 ngo비네 술당 툼비기 데우 요 마레스 다 도르제 셈바데 곰데디 ngo비네 술당 툼바기 다 레가 지글라 드로인데 갑라 ngo비네 술당 툼비기 다 레가 요레스 다 딜라 가르스나 람 마인 바지가 람레 삼교레 nga마데 네 주림도 주총수 센디가라 베 수불라 칼레망고 테 카가데 단다 데데 람 임바니도 좋아지라와 단지데 람 마임바 지글라 람인 삼니 촉도 진네 tene subula kale mangbote tende chininda tende chin tanda de yang lam yimba la yimba ta tu ji jojoro lam yimba na so lam yimba la yimba.
So we had some questions from yesterday regarding these two types of supremacy, and how do we know that we're grasping to something to be supreme that is not supreme, whether it is the view or a discipline or an austerity? Like, how do we distinguish that? How do we know that it is not that we are falling into the trap of holding a belief as paramount or supreme, or how do we know that we're falling into the trap of holding a discipline or a ritual or an austerity as being supreme? And with regard to the first, holding beliefs as paramount, that is actually explained here in the text, specifically regarding the first three beliefs. So holding a belief to be paramount means regarding the above three unwholesome beliefs as well as the basis for these beliefs, the five perpetuating aggregates, as being paramount and sacred. It causes complete clinging to an unwholesome belief. So here we specifically refer to the beliefs that fall into the categories of belief in the transitory collections as the self, the extreme views, or the perverted beliefs, the perverted views. When we hold to any belief, or we think that any belief of these three categories is the supreme, then this is identified as the mistaken view of holding a belief as paramount. So specifically these misunderstandings, these misapprehensions of there existing, there being a self, and that the so that is based on believing that the aggregates are truly established, that they're pure, that they're permanent, that they're stable, and on the basis of those aggregates, then grasping to a self, grasping to extreme views, or grasping to perverted beliefs as being the supreme, the paramount views. So that would then be to believe that so these kind of views are not supreme. They're mistaken. They're not in accord with how things truly are, with the real nature of phenomena. So they're not in accordance with reality, with the truth, but holding them to be supreme, to be in accordance with reality, that is then to hold them as being supreme. So if we think that I exist, and based on that also my hand, my house, my family, my friends, and so on, because we grasp to the five aggregates as being this I, and thinking that this belief of the I and mine is supreme, is holding a view as the first type of view as supreme. So it's not established as that. It's an artificial idea that we're creating based on the aggregates. It's a mistaken idea, an apprehension of grasping to a truly existent self based on these aggregates. And so that then also leads to the second type of view, of mistaken view, the belief in holding extremes. So thinking that the extreme views are the paramount, thinking of the view of permanence to be paramount, refers to the fact that one thinks that the self or the aggregate, the five aggregates, they're actually birth, that they that they're actually permanent. They stay the same from birth all the way to the point when we pass away. We think that I'm the one who was born, and I'm the one who will pass away, and that the person, the self, is permanent throughout one's life. While in reality, we can see that the continuation of the aggregates and the continuation of experience is based on the momentary coming together of causes and conditions, and meeting of these causes and conditions, then leading to the next moment that is conditioned by causes and conditions, and that forms a continuum, but it's subject to momentary change. And so to think that today or yesterday's me and today's me is the same is a view in permanence, which is not in accord to reality, because the body changes, the experience changes, the mind changes, everything changes on a momentary basis because they're conditioned by momentary causes and conditions. So to hold the view of the self to be permanent, the aggregates to be permanent, to be the ultimate view, the truth of reality, is then grasping to a view as being paramount, which is not the supreme view. And on the other side of the spectrum, then, to hold onto a view of annihilation to be true, while the continuation of causes and conditions coming together actually is continues. It's not something that starts with this life suddenly and then experiences and everything just finishes at the end of life and everything disperses. But there's a continuation throughout lifetimes. There is a continuation of causes and conditions. And to negate that and believe that elements come together, then suddenly there's a mind, there are the five aggregates, and then this just disperses, disappears into thin air at the end of one's life, and there's no continuation whatsoever, would be the extreme view of annihilation. And to grasp to that view, and any kind of view that holds that belief, is then holding to this as supreme, while it's not in accord with reality, because it does not portray the real nature of phenomena. And that then also leads to the perverted views, wrong views in that sense, perverted belief that there's no karma cause and effect, that there's no karmic law, that we don't have to experience the results of our actions, and to be really persuaded of that kind of view. So we can identify the holding a belief to be paramount really as holding any kind of belief to be the supreme that falls into these three categories. And there are many, all the different variations of that, but there are these three categories of views that one can hold, and hold to any of those to be paramount, to be the supreme, while they're not, because they're not in accord with reality, is then this mistaken belief in supremacy. And so we can know that these are not correct because we can study, we can investigate, and the more we learn about the views, the more we learn, for example, about karma, cause, and effect, we see how this really plays out in reality, how that really fits with our experience, and so on. So we can learn about the correct understanding of karma, cause, and effect, and then we and we understand how the what is in accord with the truths, with the two truths, and so on. So we can learn the correct view, the correct understanding of the nature of phenomena, and thus we then understand what is not it, what is incorrect, what are the perverted views, and so on. And then also the question continued with asking about how do we know then that, for example, practice like the practice of Vajrasattva is not a belief in a ritual to be paramount or a practice to be paramount while it's not? Like how can we know what when we're grasping to a practice to be paramount while it's not? And then I clarified further to say, especially like, how do you know something is actually useful and brings a result, especially as ordinary beings? So with regard to discipline and rituals to be paramount, it says here, it is to believe that a non-purifying or non-liberating discipline or ritual, as well as its basis, the five aggregates, is purifying, liberating, or capable of causing emancipation. So this refers to doing all sorts of practices and going through a lot of hardships like austerities that are not actually purifying. So one thinks that they're purifying, but they're not. Like, for example, the austerities of just like surrounding oneself by fire, and wanting the negativities to be burned away, or austerities like only drinking 1 drop of water a day and not eating only 1 grain of rice a day. There are all these different kinds of austerities that people undergo with the whole, while holding the belief that these would actually be leading to a result, while they're not. And the difference to the practice of Vajrasattva, for example, as a practice, as a ritual discipline of purification, is that it is actually effectual. It actually does purify our negativities if you practice the Vajrasattva correctly. And how do we know that? For ordinary sentient beings, we don't see that result straight away. But this is actually, that would lead to a really long discussion. When we learn the practice of Vajrasattva, when we get the instructions, then there are all these indications. They are the exact and reasonable stages and reasons why and how the practice is functioning, how it will purify our negativities, how it acts as an antidote against them. This is all laid out clearly, and there's a reason behind every aspect of the practice. So we can't, of course, go into all the detail here, what makes that practice of Vajrasattva as an example, one that is effective compared to the others. But we can actually, if you study the ritual, we can see why and how it is effective. And then so we can, even though we might not be able to see the effects directly as we practice as an ordinary sentient being, but still with the right understanding and the ability to study these practices, we can actually say that they are effective, and we can come to that conclusion, which is not possible for these other practices. If you go into detail there, they do not have the foundation that betrays their effectiveness. So through studying and through eventually experience, one can distinguish between those practices that are part of the path towards liberation and practices that are not. And the belief in supremacy of or holding disciplines and rituals as paramount, that really means that one holds on to a path to be supreme, which is not supreme, to hold on to something that's not the path as the path, something that's inefficient or not fulfilling the aim of liberation to fulfill the aim of liberation.
네. lokta lende demba mare labna lokta shibade lende demba midu senen tide samkinde ina lokta ina lende yore labna kandes senen ha ko gures kandes chi lokar tawa se ngobe nesu la le kewa sana dewu dewa thogi yoba ta le mikewa sana dewu 동알 중계 요바 데라 아니 데이터도 출신도 되네 마도네 되네 레준데 메와다고 군조순 메와도 되네 중순 로버타와레스 다네 슝룩라 토섬치 네 되네 네 칼레 레 준데기 남샤 레 라텐네 디우 간게 뇽게 요바 레스나 간데 임바 레게 에와 간데 디우 간데 뇽게데 간데 참 살보 지네 하 고기레스 하 고소나 되네 렌데라 lokta makewa de desne lokta chi makowa ho desne ha 고기레스
ane dine legume de dambares nina diores labdudi khandes ko valengores
이제 지 내준데 전화 가족이 밀라 팔라 책 독자 랍송나 코정 가족 남상직을 데우디 출 남상직 독자라기도 하시 어디로 지나 하고 그러 전화 가족 배나 추저지 들어라 인데 추 장모를 나고 청소나 데우 가족 장기도 와 자기도 와 니마트나 양 저기다 어디서 락바 내준데 락바 양 차와 다 남샤만 보여요 봐.
Then we had another question with regard to perverted belief. So there we said that perverted beliefs or perverted views, wrong, mistaken views, are to believe that there is no karma, cause and effect. That means then that the law of karmic connections, karmic efficacy is actually something that that holds true, right? So what does that mean? So perverted view really refers to the idea that there is not such a thing as results that come from actions. So if one doesn't believe that virtuous actions lead to happiness and non-virtuous actions lead to suffering, these kinds of principles are correct, right? That virtue leads to happiness and non-virtue leads to suffering. These are correct principles. And to believe that this is not true, that these principles do not hold at all, and to not believe in the three jewels, for example, to believe that they don't exist, that would then be a mistaken or perverted view, belief. Now, and I clarified the questions a little bit further. How do we understand then that karma, cause and effect are true, that there are correct principles, that the karmic law exists? This is actually something that we learn about, and we understand. We gain a deeper and deeper understanding by studying the different texts and traditions. And so we learn the distinctions, the more subtle workings of the karmic law by diving deep into the study of the texts and traditions. So we learn about the definitions, how and what happens, the different classifications, and so on. And we can see that in our own experience as well on a course level. And from there, we can infer on the more subtle levels of karmic law. So we can, on a very coarse level, we can see that when we do something, if we say something bad to someone, then that leads to a negative reaction from the person we say it to. They often get angry at us straight away. So there is a result. We engage in an action and there is a result. Or if we hold out our hand into cold water, we suddenly we feel the cold. That's a result of putting our hand into the cold water. Suddenly we're freezing. Or when we go out in the sun and sit down out in the sun, and then suddenly we get really hot. That's a result of our action. These are very coarse uh, action and result situations, but from those experiences that an action has a result, creates a certain result, then we can also infer on the relative experience of karmic law that all actions bear results, and so that karma, so karmic actions and causes lead to certain results. That's what we mean with karma cause and a result to exist. Like that, this actually holds true. These principles hold true.
네. 따와 이제 따와 나데 하고는 가도 오늘 가르쳐 버려서 따와 나데 하 직속에 따와 콜라 하고네 네 풍봉하라 다도 짐바당 다게 짐바데 빵고스 다네 타르진기 따와데 하고네 되네요. 우밀람 강임바데 아니 하고고스 로타데 빵위고네 아니 계자된조 양다바지 죽고스 tawa choksen tenzo pang ne tawa ngenpa tenzo la shenpa de pang goyos ne tsulim tulshu tenzo ha go na tsulim tulshu de pang wi go ne tene dewu yubi lam la zon goyos.
And what now that we know the 5 views, these 5 beliefs, then what do we need to do now that we have identified What just happened?
Like a lot of Western philosophers compare Nagarjuna and Wittgenstein a lot. They do have a lot of things. Yeah, conceptual designations. Yeah.
Hi. Hi.
Conceptual
Can
reality.
Yeah.
Conceptual reality. Also, the last thing I'll say before you go is
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Can you hear me? Hi. Did is Lama here? I think he also got thrown out. Right? Did everyone get kicked out or?
I was kicked out. I mean, not really kicked out, but all of a sudden there was nothing. So I kicked myself out. I came back in. I went back and forth a few times. Now this is my fourth try, and only now do I see anything.
Yeah,
I was able to
same
get onto other.
Same here in
I was
class.
able to get onto other websites, so it must be something specific to the server, to the school server or something.
Yeah, I think Teams just crashed. I tried also through the browser. Didn't work.
Yeah, I could get to CNN and all that jazz.
13 people stayed. 13 people were stayed. We were connected, 13 people. And we thought that maybe in Nepal there was the power cut or something.
Well, not really, but Teams crashed in Nepal apparently. So Lamala is back. How far did you hear me? Like when did it happen?
Let's see. I think hello.
Turn on the recording, please. Can you
The
turn on the recording?
The recording is running. But where did I stop? How far did you hear me?
Before you describe,
So I heard
the different beliefs.
describe the 5 views. Now that we know the 5 views, then what do we need to do? That was the last thing I heard.
Everything again. Okay.
And a little bit after hello, good morning, but something like that.
Mark. Okay, I'll talk again about the 5 views. So what we need to do when we have identified the 5 views is that each of them has their own function, right? So if we identify, once we have understood what the mistaken belief in the transitory collections of a self is, then we should be letting go of the view of the self, grasping to a self based on the transitory collection. So that lets us let go of the belief in a truly existent self and that which belongs to the self, so an I and mine. And then once we have identified the belief of the extreme beliefs, then we should be endeavoring in the middle path instead of falling into the extremes of these mistaken extreme views. And once we have identified the perverted beliefs, then we are able to engage in the roots of virtue. So we should be engaging in the roots of virtue based on the understanding of karma, cause and effect, and so on. Once we have identified what the holding a belief to be paramount refers to, then we should avoid falling into the trap of any of the above mentioned 3 beliefs. And once we have identified holding a discipline or ritual to be paramount, then we can engage in the correct paths that lead to the result. So we can engage in into the path that leads to the result of liberation correctly. Lasse. lama la kailan kikega so. De la las 따동 양키야.
년년 니슈레 년년 니슈레 초와네 아니 콩토펠데 덱바소 뇌방문수 숑바르 제바스 지 콩로 셈라 셰당 낭네 규바 덱바당 아니 규바 덱바 라소바로 아니 뇌방문수 아니 마 짬용와델라 좀 짬버 제행기게 셈델라 아니 콩로 셈중 콩로스라 그래스 드네 콘도 짐바스 콘진데 양결 콩도기 차실라 도바레스 차도바스 네비 삼바균 메당신 메세 바라스 지 고갑락 송나 아니 콜라 네바 데다 데다우 치고 삼네 셈낭라 아니 냐르네 대게 딘데 셈바 셈중되게 명라 콘진나게스 미세버지 책바 사와스 대양 콩도라 인스 아니 디 책바 사용데 갑델라 콘진기 귤레스 뭐마 데다 데다우 코 나라 두자 라브레 신데스네 딘데다 양 코에 데다 데다우 랍송 삼네 디네 파르데게 데다 데라우 랍송 삼네 콘도 젬비고네 디기 귤레치네 디 콜라 쇠바 곰마도네 책주보 딘데 랍 파르 쇼 도와라 책주보 랍 코와 디 책주보 랍도 주겐게 다 삼로 중기라와 어디 명라 심중되게 명라 책바 사와스 책바데레스 넘버 세와니 공도 차로 도바랑 레스 디양 닝제와 메베 넘버 토선벨레지 넘버 세와스 넘버 세와스 파족의 동알단 달나 삼백이 된데 삼로 메베고니라 파기 동알 중계에 삼네 델라 낭메 동 나이 레가 티라우 치수나 콜라 동알 중계에 센텐데게 삼로 마당내라 닝제다우 메베고니 네 지 네바 가야롱아 제와데 타우 딘조 네 넘버 세와스.
Okay, so now we have reached the 20 subsidiary disturbing emotions. And the first one of those is fury. Fury is the increase of anger. It causes one to prepare to harm others, such as by hitting them. So fury is really an intensification of anger. So that it's the mental state where one really wants to harm the other person and prepares mentally for engaging in the physical act of, for example, hitting the person because out of this anger, out of this fury. So the preparation for the physical act of harming the other person that comes that's a part of the intensification of just being angry. So anger aversion, it intensifies to fury, where one really wants to harm the other person then. Then resentment belongs to the category of anger. It causes one to cling to an intention to cause harm and to refrain from forgiving. So resentment also belongs to the category of aversion. So once someone has done something bad towards one, or once one has developed anger, then to not be able to let go of this, but holding on to a grudge and not being able to bear the fact of that old harm that was being done, but keep revisiting this anger and keep holding this anger in the mind for a long time, that's then resentment. And so that doesn't allow one to forgive any harm that was done in the past. So, and one is just waiting for an opportunity to respond. So if I get the opportunity, I will engage in I will give it back to that other person, that kind of thought, waiting for the opportunity to get back at them. Then spite causes one to be unforgiving and utter harsh words out of fury or resentment. So spite is also an aspect of anger, also belongs to anger, aversion. And so either out of fury in the moment, or the grudge that one holds for a long time, the resentment that one is holding onto, to then be unforgiving and being really nasty to the other person, uttering harsh words, that's then spite. So not being able to bear that which one has this aversion against, or what was done to one, and then uttering, like saying bad things and saying mean things, that's then this spite. Hostility, also again an aspect of anger, belongs to the category of anger. A function is to be uncompassionate and cause harm. So hostility also is part of anger, also belongs to anger. But here the emphasis is on the lack of any compassion, any kind of loving kindness towards the other. So loving compassion is this thought of, may that other person or this other being be free from suffering. And a lack of such an attitude, a lack of compassion and loving kindness for that other person, then leads to the ability to harm that other person. So wishing that other person not to be free from suffering, but to wish them suffering, to have a mindset where one thinks, if I do this and that to that other person, then they will suffer. They will actually experience hardship and suffering. That kind of attitude is this hostility. It's an anger that is free from compassion, free from the wish that they would be free from suffering.
차도 내 공주 차도 차도 대양 공주기 차시 나나 똑바인 수마레 공주 시당기 나노라 아니 저데 간데스나 랑닝고라 랑라 제땀 년다 안에 균노 롱저딘데 고디딘데 소라 차네 서수술라딘데 고발라 되네 셴덴족이 퇴섬야고 셴덴족이 초림이하고 셴데족이 안에 로종 가리 발푼순 토가 된졸라 안에 미세바 센셈 콩네 투발제바스 안에 랑다 된데 망고 여나 도섬네 콜라 망고 여송나 안에 양 파룰 보데라 망고 여송나 안에 딜라 셈 마수바 셈 투병게레스 오티 맹라네 차도 이 메데시 셈날도 미네비 덴체바오스 아티리 갑라 이데 안에 대화도 중계 말에 이데 지 서로가 맞기로 중용교를 셈나 디인데 이 메데시 셈 코롱 장마 셈 야복하는 셈 상복하는 미네 날도 미네베에세 녜바 탐지기 덴체교레스 그냥 요라게 주레스 단다데 니니니주나라 요데니 닝구르솔라 차베스 랑라 균노롱저 당 담년라다 고디 구샵라 소바텐졸라 셈차네 덴데직 토로치나 데 삼네 랑게 녜바 베데스 소솔라 균 강당 강연나 류기고네 균 나기고네 균 이기고네 균 nani 강지 돈이 꼈는데 꼈는 저 매상이 매도도 저치니 예비기 균종이 셈 자주와 차당 띠목이 차도 바래서 예박이 아니 못하는 예바든 저 중요하게 균장에게로 차당 띠목이 차도 바래서 양답이 담아 예비 발도 줘봐오 되니 예바 연난 예바 매도도 진이 대선나 되니 들이 야 담아 추 기위 신년대 저게 담아 된도 가도 슈나냐 다디 셈는라 주기요 말이다 그런 게 예바 연난 예바 매도도 그냥 진이 되네 그냥 되는데 가라 담아 된 저기 셈는라 콩들라 취에라 바르체 지비레 스티기 단 예바 추기 남라다 견 디다 디다오레 연된 디다 디다오레 견데 뻥고레 연된데 랑고레 신데 담가망도 숨기로 왔더니 딘데 숨나양 딘데 수수기다 견 연나도 견 매도도 진대서나 딘데 담가 숨샤교된도 셈토라 야고진이 주투게 말에 코간스는 셈데 견 연나 매도도 견 배고 셈되긴도 지디 딘데진 딘데 숨는데 견네 냥고르 속에 치랑라 메비 연된 요바라 쳬네세 이제 규라인데 양랑 야 냥고를 든돌라 셈차네 아니 랑라 연된 메나 양 여도도 도치네 아니 연된 여바 여도도 치네 아니 치라 쮸네 되네 북라 랑라 껴네 나양 되네 랑라 연된 여도도 치네 치로라 들어와 견 가양메 연된 이랑신 인도도 도치네 tenpa minpe shen luje sitini mi shengi tati kalata ngune yunden yobare sini ngune kecha jambo ngune kecha yabo ngune simba yabo ngune bugla thö samgi ngune yunden yabo re do samgi re simigi ta susu gen ngune thö sam yodo do ngune ji kunjo cholam yabo yundo do tendechi 아니 전에 생기 따디 갑라 아니 문에 여도도 저지 랑라 매나양 여도도 전에 신루어지 몸비 차도 바데스 텐데 여도도 지고 삼바디기 삼로디기 민라 아니 심중 주라이데레스 녀몽바다 니비 녀몽바 탐제기 조고치기레스 디 주세긴데기 로비 초와 주비 덴제바오 로비 초와 서리갈라 생기 만돌라다 가르스나 초와 사야 통해 골라 된저 제기라 아니 콘도 연된 디다로 오 선내다라와 다 연된 퇴섬기 연된 디다오 요래 아니 군주 자와 줄람 디다오 요래 삼네 되니 다 미경아 졸라다 다지 초와 자르기라와 아니 소소게 다 간서나 연대 맨나 외도도 저치니 되나 다디 록비 초와승들을 두기제 쓰는 순간 땅 모차 매바스가 되니 다 금신도 제대에서 다 금신도 제대에서 다 가상 우리 모차와승인데 다 금신도 제대 디빌레다 좀 봐서 네 대단 디다고 지초게 말해서 다나 드네가라 최적인 미연수나 디과 디단 디다고 지초게 말해서 다 금신도 제네로와 तेने दिलमिला मोचा लाडा तंदा मोचा मेबा लामना अनि ताक जुमसिन्दो चेते तिकबा लामे जिम बारा नय तेदा ची छोके मारे तिन्दे भाषम बिगोने तेने तिकबे लेला माजिम बारा दोसुमगी छातोना छातो बादा तेने तिकबा चेशाबा तिनजुरे स्लावे न्योम बादा न्yewe न्योमंगु तो चेबा वो so
Next comes envy. Envy belongs to the category of anger. It is a mental state that is deeply disturbed by the desire to obtain honor and gain for oneself and by the inability to bear the excellence of others. It forms the support for unhappiness, for the mind's ability to rest in naturalness, and for negative actions. So envy then is also an aspect of anger because it is motivated by the wish to obtain all these things like fame, honor, praise, material goods, all of these things for oneself. And through that one develops aversion against others having these things. Envy means that one cannot bear it when others experience all of these things that one wants for oneself. So if someone else's praise, someone else's has a lot of fame, has a lot of money, and so on, that one cannot bear to see, and because one wants that for oneself. And the problem with that is that it actually brings us a lot of mental unhappiness. It's really from the sensations that are experienced, it's really mental unhappiness. It lets us suffer when we take offense with other people experiencing good things and just wanting that for oneself, not wanting them to have it. So it really disturbs the mind profoundly, and it doesn't let us have a pure and clear mind. It doesn't let the mind rest in its natural state. We cannot develop kindness towards others. We cannot develop a kind state of mind, a loving state of mind, if we begrudge others for what they have, all the good things that we want for ourselves, and we cannot bear to see that others have it. So it's a very disturbing state of mind that really creates a lot of unhappiness and doesn't allow us to rest our mind in a natural state, because it's very disturbing. And with it then also it leads to a lot of negative actions to fulfill one's desire and make sure that others don't have these nice things that we wish for. Hypocrisy is the deceitful attitude which perpetuates negativity, concealing one's own faults because of the desire for such things as honor and gain. It belongs to the categories of attachment, anger, and delusion, and obstructs obtaining true instructions. So hypocrisy is to hide one's own faults, to pretend one doesn't have faults of body, speech, and mind, even though one has these faults. And one hides them because one wants to get something. One wants to get fame. One wants to get praised. One wants to get material gain. One wants to receive a lot of praise, fame, and so on, like all the worldly goals. And so in order to get that, one pretends that one doesn't have any faults, or one hides one's fault. And so because one does not acknowledge these faults, then they will continue. One will continue having these faults in one's body, speech, and mind if one just pretends that they're not there. And so this creates a big obstacles to the obtainment of any kind of true instructions, because one pretends that one doesn't have any faults. So then one cannot get instructions that really address these faults. One cannot really obtain the instructions as long as one pretends that everything is good. So the instructions refers to instructions with regard to what the qualities that need to be developed and the faults that need to be abandoned. And so if one thinks that there's nothing to be abandoned because one doesn't acknowledge one's own faults, one is hypocrite with regard to that, then one cannot receive the faults, the instructions that would address these faults correctly. So therefore this does not lead, like this leads to or is an obstacle to the instructions that would help. It belongs to the category of delusion and attachment and forms the support for disturbing emotions, subsidiary disturbing emotions, as well as for leading a perverted life. So pretense then is to pretend that one has. Do you still hear me? I think Lamala froze. Do you still hear me? Did it crash again?
We hear you.
We lost you for a little bit.
Okay, I will
Yeah.
repeat pretense then.
No,
But
lost
Lamala
you
is
for maybe 10 seconds. Only like 10 seconds, I think.
okay,
Very little.
but we lost Lamala.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna finish and then we will see where he is.
Sounds
Pretense
good.
refers to pretending to have qualities that one actually doesn't have. So hypocrisy meant to not acknowledge one's own faults that one actually has. And then pretense refers to pretending that one has qualities from study and reflection, or qualities of one's behavior, one's conduct that one actually does not have. So one pretends to be better than one is, in the sense that one pretends to have qualities that one doesn't truly have. And so when pretending to have exalted qualities that one actually doesn't have, then one deceives people, and that leads to so one does it with the motivation for honor, gain, praise, fame, all of these things, but what this leads to is an increase of the afflictive emotions, both the root afflictions as well as the subsidiary disturbing emotions. But also it leads to the negative action of wrong livelihood, to leading a perverted life. So this refers to the way that one gains one's livelihood. So one receives one's livelihood based on what other people see in one. So if one has a lot of qualities, they think then they want to support one, and so one gets food and housing and clothing. So one can get one's livelihood. One is provided with a livelihood based on the qualities that other people see in one. And so if one pretends to have qualities of listening and of study and reflection, or a particularly good conduct, while one doesn't have those, then one cheats people into supporting one. So that's the wrong livelihood that is meant here. And then lack of conscience is the next negativity here. Lack of conscience means to not shunning evil deeds on account of oneself. It belongs to the category of the three poisons and assists the disturbing emotions and subsidiary disturbing emotions. So this is the opposite of the quality that we saw, the virtue that we saw of conscience. We said that conscience means that one refrains from any kind of negativity based on considering oneself or the Dharma. So a conscience that one develops based on the Dharma, on the teachings, and not wanting to go against that and seeing how that would be harmful for oneself. So refraining from negativities because of considering oneself and the Dharma. And here the lack of conscience means then that one doesn't consider this, doesn't consider the Dharma, does not consider how this affects oneself if one engages in negativity, and does them anyway. So just not considering that, not having any conscience with regard to these facts, but just to engage in negativities anyways. So that leads to all the negativities. Lasse.
Đó là cái 얘기 각성 건다.
그래서 텔 메바니 텔
건다.
메바니 그래서 건다
Ge tragedi. Kesva.
가니 그래서 가니 텔 메바니 신 균센도 제데스 미게위 초라 젬바 메바르스 다 가상 야가나 텔 쉐와데 텔 요바스나 나간 쪽에 미게와 대단 대다 제나 셴게 직 라피레 아니 이제 미셴게 딘데 독자 딘데 라피레 할라마 군조스 시그니슈여레 콩나버즈 툭텔 로게레 딘데도 선배되기 민라 텔 요바스나는 단다두루 텔 메바스디가라 셴 김전도 제데 메게 초라 젬바 메바르스다 셴 텐조기 간람나라 말라나 말랑나 주도메 나랑 가리치니 도나디 지긴스 남나 텔 메바레스 도승기 차도 니망군지 도시바스 차바스 다들 차바스네 띠묵당 아니 띠묵당 차과기 차도버레 개위신이 된저게 렉바 꿀와데라스 개위신이 대바 마제 개와 제 대바 뻥 근데 람나 렉바 꿀 용데 갑데라양 델라소소 메죽니 세데네 대 개와라 개와 임바 함마고 대바라 대바 임바 시라 가능 도트고 메와 는 미게와당 데데게 왕가 심 숙주모도 데데체나 차바다 데모 데데 왕기 도네 세데네 개위신이 강송아 델라 메죽진 랑게 녜바 디바라 되바데 랑게 녜바 된도 탐제 베샤네 깝니 두긴두기도 했습니다. 디디 무슨 개위신이 제 강송교요. 나라는 녜바 디탄 디타고 메세 요 마레스 텔레스네 라바티 민라 다니데 차바세 녜바 메 텔레스네 람 도단 칸에 녜바 메스나다 아니양 단다지 야강나 직스 레브라데 yo la de kanasana khanika malamna jini sosoge pa khasumne nepa me do chi shawade mena yo re ta ta duru chaba siginde khani korong uyos korong ngala nepa te tan te taw mes nepa yona ban nepa be ni ro ngala nepa te tan te taw mes ne labne delesne ta delesne labne ani nepa bawa de sen ta de labo sambe simjung jero simjing azola sim 어디 셈데 민다데니 아니 차바 생 심중데 레송레 디 때우여 송나니 틱바체와라 교바 제기 마레 교바 땅데니 레퍼 민네 베텐 제바오 세 토리 땅 탐제 쳔바 초라 레게 툭툭에 초도라 람디 초라 툭툭이요 마레스 레버지 땐 민네 베텐 제바오 인세르나니 도차기 줄레 요체소 나데니 셈차니 팔라 땅 마토가 도병고 볼라 담작 진베 진대와 심내대와 담작 진이 심대와 요체된도 뇽뇽뇽뇽 도름 맞추고 저의 심리 대비된게 차지 그래서
So the next is then shamelessness. Shamelessness means to personally engage in what is unvirtuous without inhibition on account of others. It belongs to the categories of the three poisons and helps all the disturbing emotions. So that is then the opposite of shame that we saw in the positive, in the virtuous, in the list of the virtues. And so shameless, we said that shame refers to the shame that makes one avoid negativities because one considers what other people say, what what anyone in one society and so on would say if one would engage in these negativities, or if one considers what then the guru and the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that observe our negativities, how they would view that. So, and there we're considering others as and would develop shame if we were to engage in negativities. But a lack of such a shame, a lack of consideration of how other people would view us or what they would say about us if we engage in negativities. And it's about the negativities. Like not caring about what the people say if we engage in negativities. That's then shamelessness. So not considering what what others think. And so with a lack of shame, like when we're completely shameless, then we will engage in all sorts of negativities because we're not considering others in that context. Then next comes concealment. Concealment belongs to the category of delusion and attachment. It means not to engage in what has been fully warned about and to desire to cover up for one's faults. It forms the support for not feeling regret. So concealment refers then also to a way to cover up one's faults. Even though one was thoroughly instructed in what qualities are and what faults are, then to say, oh, I don't have these faults, I do not possess these faults of body, speech, and mind, is concealment. So upon thorough instruction of what they are and what should be abandoned, to pretend that one doesn't have these faults and actually saying, oh, that doesn't apply to me, that's concealment. The difference between hypocrisy and concealment is that in hypocrisy, we're just pretending in our actions that we don't have the faults of body, speech, and mind, while in concealment, we're actually verbalizing it and say, oh, I don't have these faults, this does not apply to me. So that's where the difference between these two lies. And so that leads to not feeling regret. If we then engage in any kind of negative actions based on our faults, if we conceal our faults in this way and say, but that we don't have these faults, it doesn't apply to us, then we won't have any regrets if we're actually engaging in negativities on no regret for these faults. Then stinginess is to hold tightly onto possessed objects such as utensils and so forth because of attachment. It causes the inability to part with one's possessions. So stinginess means to be very attached to one's belongings and not being able to give those away, not being able to part with them, and not even be able to use them oneself. So even the aspect of miserliness, because one is so attached and cannot let go of the possessions that one has. So that's then stinginess. Let's stop here for today and recite the dedication and aspiration prayers together.
Jambalam Bavu Jidara Kemba Dang Gundo Sambo Deyang Deshen De Da Kunje Cheso Dalop Chen Kewa Deda Tamje Ram Do Dusum Shebe Jawa Tamje Owa Kanla Chondo Ngamba Dage Kebe Zawa Digwen Jang Sambo Chöchen Rabdo Ngowa Enji Sunam Deje Tamje Sepa Nyi Tomne Nyebe Chanam Pamche Kega Nache Bala Vichoba Ye Sibe Chole Dowa Dolowa Sho Kewa De Jio Kun Sonam Yeshe Chozo Sonam Yeshe Lejon Wa Tamba Kunye Tombara Sho Lo Chuso Dovara Chinye Labdo So Chulamdo Dovara Chinye Labdo Lam Tulva Salvara Chinye Labdo So Tulva Yeshe So Chavara Chinye Labdo So That's all.
Lasso, Tuchinang. So my question for you for today, for the attendance, is whether there was something you didn't hear because one of us did cut out. If you like, please mention if there's anything that was cut out because of some reason, the Teams collapse or the internet cutting out for Lamala or me. What a disturbed online class. I hope next time is better again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.
See
you later. See you later.